Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today on our webinar discussing entrepreneurial resilience amidst economic turbulence. My name is Abdul Mazar Shafi. I'm a 2014 engineering grad, a partner at Quantum Leap Consulting, and a co-founder at Upstart Ed. I'm here today representing the McGill Young Alumni Board as Vice President of our association. What we aim to do is connect, support, and engage students and graduates of the last decade with McGill University. As part of this mission, today we are pleased to have with us three notable alumni. Reza Satchu is the founder and managing partner of Alignvest Management and the founder, former co-chair, and founding chairman of NEXT Canada. Following his arts degree from McGill in '91, he went on to obtain an MBA from Harvard Business School and now serves as a member of their Canadian Advisory Board. Reza has extensive experience as an entrepreneur and investor, having managed several operating businesses from inception, including Supplier Market, Storage Now, and KGS Alpha Capital Markets. In 2007, he was named one of Canada's top 40 under 40. Thank you for being with us today, Reza. Justin Hunt is the co-founder and CEO of Blaise Transit, an AI-based platform that allows transit agencies to run on-demand public buses. In 2018, he not only completed his engineering degree, but the Next 36 Entrepreneurship program. In 2019, he was named one of the C2 emerging entrepreneurs. While at McGill, Justin completed 6 internships in various industries and founded a scholarship program and a food bank. Thanks for being here, Justin. Jaclyn Ling completed her management degree in 2014 and is also an alumna of the Next 36 program. She's also the co-founder of Hatchways, a company that empowers hidden tech talent and takes the risk out of the hiring process. At 24, she sold her first tech startup, a fashion app called Blink, to Kik Interactive, a Canadian instant messaging company. She worked at Kik until 2017 as head of product for the Bots platform team. Thanks for being with us today, Jaclyn.
Thanks for having me.
As you can see, we have quite the exceptional roster of entrepreneurs here with us today. Reza will begin with a presentation. Following that, we'll have a fireside chat and Q&A, led again by Reza with Jaclyn and Justin. Before we start, please note that you can submit questions that you have for the speakers using the chat box feature. Reza may ask you a few questions, so again, feel free to answer through the chat box to engage with our panel. We'll do our best to answer as many questions as we can. And please note the webinar is being recorded and will be shared with you following completion. Thank you once again for joining us. I'll now turn things over to Reza. Reza, it's all yours.
Great. Thanks very much, Abdul, for that kind introduction and for putting this panel together. First of all, I want to welcome everyone that's on the webinar. I know this is a difficult time and a trying time and an uncertain time. But what I want to talk about is how that uncertainty and that discomfort can actually create some very interesting opportunities for you. And I'm going to take as a given that the reason people are on this call is because they have some entrepreneurial ambitions. And I will talk broadly about entrepreneurship and what I think it takes. What are some of the fundamental values and traits of entrepreneurs that I've met, having been an entrepreneur for 2 decades, and frankly having taught entrepreneurship for now 17 years. I want to start with a very special place, which is the place you guys go to school, which is McGill University. I think that you know, when you're going through a university like McGill, you don't fully appreciate at the time what a great place it is. And I guess with the benefit of some hindsight and thinking about the things that I learned and the people that I met at McGill, it was an extraordinary place for me. My brother went there, I met my wife there, many of my closest friends, still to this day, I met at McGill. And I think that perhaps one of the things that I enjoyed most about McGill is that it is just such an international student body. And I think that for someone who's curious and wants to solve problems and wants to think globally, being at McGill, where you're interacting with people from all over the world, is critically valuable. I think the other thing for me at McGill that was really important was it was the place where I learned that I wanted to become an entrepreneur. You know, I think there's a period in your life where you don't know how you're going to do it, but you sort of say to yourself, this is what I want to do, and this is what I want to be. And there's no guarantee it's going to work, but that realization came to me at McGill, and it was a very important realization. I suspect many of you also want to be entrepreneurs. And, you know, if we were in person, I would ask you why you want to be an entrepreneur. And what I'd imagine what many would say in their most honest moments is that the reason why they want to be an entrepreneur is because it gives them some sense of power, some sense of control, a level of prestige, credibility, money, flexibility, the ability to be the boss, to create things, okay? But I would say these are all sort of first level impacts, first order impacts of being an entrepreneur or a successful entrepreneur around money, power, prestige. What I think, and frankly, I wanted all those things at McGill, okay? But I think what you realize is that the core underlying driver for why so many people want to be entrepreneurs and the fact that this initial group of traits, power, prestige, money, are transient at best, is that what entrepreneurship does is it allows you to have the freedom to make a positive impact on the people you care about, okay? And so that could be your family, that could be your university, that could be your city, that could be the country, that could be the world, okay? But deep down, I think that what every entrepreneur has in common, and frankly, I would say, you know, every human being has in common, is that each one of us wants to have the freedom to have a positive impact on the things that people that we care about, okay? In my case, I wanted to get to that place as soon as possible, all right? So then the question is, given this sort of set of traits and these qualities, why are there so few entrepreneurs, right? Why is it that, given how compelling the proposition is, it's hard to imagine that you could have total freedom to have a positive impact in a more conventional field, okay? So the question is, why is it so scary for so many people to make the leap to be an entrepreneur, given that the prize can be so valuable? And I guess what I'd say is that there are two things two things that block people, and especially young people, from becoming entrepreneurs. And I guess I've got some credibility in that I've now taught for many, many years. And what I would say, and I would also say that I felt these same things, okay? So the first and most common reason why people who want to be entrepreneurs but ultimately don't actually make the leap is the very simple reason that they can't come up with an idea, okay? They'd love to do it, but they just don't have a good idea, right? They just, you know, they have this model where one day they're going to be walking down the street, they're going to see a flash of lightning, and this beautiful idea is going to come to them, and it's all going to work out perfectly. And the problem with that strategy is entrepreneurship doesn't work that way. So the model they're using to come up with an idea that somehow it's serendipity is just flawed. There are ideas everywhere. You should just take a notepad, live your life for a day, and think about all the problems that you encounter from a day-to-day perspective, okay? And how things could be better, whether it's a product you want, a service you want, whatever it may be. They are everywhere, okay? And what I'd say is the problem is, even if you make the leap and you say that they're everywhere and that you could come up with an idea, okay? The problem is the second problem that is the block is that what I call this quest for perfect information, okay? So I have this motto which says any idiot can make a decision with perfect information, right? So even if you come up with an idea, it's very hard for someone who has very limited resources, limited experience, limited network to think that this is a good idea, right? So even if you cross the chasm, you're like, I've got an idea, you now have to suspend disbelief that the whole bunch of people who have more money, more expertise, more credibility, more networks have somehow missed this idea, and that you have figured it out. And so what happens with most people is that they sort of paralysis sets in, and what you say is, well, I just need a little more information. And the problem with is that you don't actually need little information, you need close to perfect information. And the problem with waiting for perfect information is that the opportunity is gone by the time you have it. And so this combination of not being able to look for ideas, and then more importantly, not having the confidence that your particular idea could possibly be legitimate, are, I think, the two traits that stand in the way of those people who self-identify as wanting to be entrepreneurs and actually becoming entrepreneurs. And so let's just talk about a couple of these for a minute with examples. Okay, so let's take, probably the world's greatest entrepreneur today is Jeff Bezos, right? He's got the most, sort of the most valuable company globally. He built it from scratch. He actually had no experience in technology prior to building this company. He was a hedge fund trader up until the age of 28, 29. And maybe he'd read a couple of books, okay? But he had an idea. And his idea was a very big idea, which was basically to sell everything online, but to start with books. Now, imagine that context. Books had been bought and sold forever. There were massive people. Barnes & Noble was a company that was worth $15 billion at the time, with stores all over the country, hundreds of people whose only job is to figure out how to sell more books. And so Bezos, I would say, had to suspend disbelief and say, you know what? Those guys have just missed this. Even though there are hundreds of people whose only job is to figure out how to sell more books and who have massive amounts of resources and capital, they have just missed this. And as much as the idea, the conviction that that was possible was more important. Michael Dell and IBM. Michael Dell was an 18, 19-year-old at University of Texas. IBM was the largest provider of laptop computers. Michael Dell at the age of 19 said, you know what? I can customize computers and get rid of the retailer and go direct. And by cutting out a piece of the channel, I'll reduce my cost, and I'll also provide a higher level of customization. And he competed against what was one of the biggest companies in the world. So again, the idea was a good one, but what was more impressive was the ability to say to yourself, you know what? I'm not going to think to myself that IBM, which has thousands of people in their strategy department who are thinking about nothing but how do I sell more computers, and who have billions of dollars of cash, I'm going to say to myself that this is a good idea, and I'm going to believe that they've just missed it. And guess what? They had just missed it. Right? Barnes & Noble is teetering on the edge of bankruptcy at this point in time. What I'd say is, when I look at sort of the businesses I've created, they are all businesses that came out of a personal problem, a personal issue. So Supplier Market, a business that I founded with my brother and a HBS classmate of mine, John Bergstone. I was working in private equity. I owned a mattress company called Simmons. We were buying coils and springs from the same people forever, the same 3 suppliers. There was this thing called the internet that was coming on, and we said, you know what? Why don't we have a broader range of suppliers and coils? And we created what was one of the first supply chain software companies that matched buyers and sellers of manufactured goods. Storage Now was purely based on me coming back to visit my parents, being on the 401, probably observing the same thing that millions of other people have observed, which is when you come from the airport of Toronto to downtown along the 401, you see a dozen storage facilities right beside each other. And having lived in San Francisco and New York, it didn't make sense to me that all these storage facilities were in the outskirts of cities. Because in San Francisco and New York, you've got multi-story facilities right in the downtown areas. And so I would say the reason we built that business had everything to do with me stopping the car and asking my limo driver to go into each one of these facilities. Not because I had a great idea, but because it was just curious to me that why did these exist one after the other? And the amazing thing is when you go into those facilities, you realize that they are completely unkept, they look really dangerous, they're terrible customer service, and yet they are almost full. And that realization is what ultimately helped build that company, okay? But my point there is not that there's any brilliance there. The point is unlike everyone else who saw it and didn't stop the car, I just happened to stop the car, okay? In terms of entrepreneurship, I would actually argue that I think people mistakenly think about entrepreneurship as starting a business or starting a venture. I actually think it's a way of living and a way of thinking, okay? I define, Justin and Jaclyn will know this, having been gone through Next Canada. Our definition of entrepreneurship is the relentless pursuit of opportunity without regard to resources currently controlled, okay? So the most important part about that statement is the second half, not the first half, right? Everyone knows that entrepreneurship requires the relentless pursuit of opportunity, right? You have to be relentless, right? You are, that is table stakes. But what the second half of the definition I think is much more powerful, which is without regard to resources currently controlled. Okay, entrepreneurs have to do things that make no sense. You got to convince people to come work for you and have them take pay cuts of 80%. You have to convince a customer to be your first customer when you've never actually sold a product before. You have to get investors to put money in you when you've never actually built anything before, okay? And you've got to build a business. Most importantly, you have to build a business with two hands tied behind your back. You have no capital. You have no relationships. You have no experience, or certainly you have less than the competitors, okay? And so this ability to sort of pursue relentlessly without regard to resources currently controlled is a critically important piece of entrepreneurship. And what I would actually argue is that it's I mentioned a way of thinking. What I'd say is that at its core, what it is it's how do you solve problems in a creative manner and in a manner that others don't see it, and without being encumbered by your current set of resources, okay? Without being encumbered by the fact that you don't have much money or you don't have much information purely because of your age. It's the ability to actually suspend that and say, you know what, I can figure this out, and I'm willing to swing the bat and try. I want to just quickly talk about, to the extent some of you are thinking about starting a business. I would say there are three very critical pieces to starting a successful venture. The first and most important is the people, okay? So reputation is critical. Your underlying motivation, your commitment as a young entrepreneur is critical. It is the most critical thing. If you're part of a founding group, how you deal with the inevitable crisis. Do you have complementary skills? Is there a level of honesty and conflict resolution that is in place? All those things are really important. But one other thing I will say, it's something that someone told me at McGill and I think was very helpful to me, was early in your career, you want to have as many people taking credit for your success as possible, okay? It just increases the probability of your success so dramatically if you've got a bunch of people who are rooting for you to win, okay? And so what that means is it doesn't matter where you are, but if you're starting a business, the people who know you and who have worked with you should be supporting you, okay? They should be investing in you, all right? And so what I'd say is that early supporters for young entrepreneurs are critically important, okay? The opportunity, look, the thing I would say is most important in terms of starting a business is figuring out two things. One is what I'd call product market fit. Do you actually have a product that your customers want, okay? Does it actually fit in the market? And if you asked your customers, would they be extremely disappointed if they didn't have your product, okay? And getting this product market fit concept is something that is critically important. I'd also say to you that focusing on the customer, who is your customer? And so simple analytics, like thinking about what is the lifetime value of your customer and dividing that, or thinking about how that compares to what it costs you to acquire that customer. is a very simple metric, but is probably the most important metric that a young entrepreneur has. Because what a young entrepreneur doesn't have is cash, right? And doesn't have information. And so you are trying to figure out how to get information as cheaply as possible, all right? And things like figuring out what is the value of a customer and what did it cost you to get that customer and making sure that that number, LTV divided by CAC, is 3, 4, 5 times is critically important. The other thing I would say that I think young entrepreneurs that people need to focus on is it's not just about buying low and selling high, okay? Meaning the reality is that the cash flow cycle of whoa, did I just get kicked off?
No, Reza, you're still on. Can you hear me?
Yeah, that's weird. I can't. Oh, there you are. Okay, it booted me off for a second. All right. So the much more important than revenues minus costs is the cash flow cycle, right? Because at the end of the day, what you don't have is enough cash, and so it is as important that you collect early and pay late. So businesses that have sort of what I call negative cash flow or negative working capital cycles are critically important. Okay. The third point I'd say that's important around a business is the deal, right? And so, meaning the deal you strike with your investors. And what I'd say here is the biggest mistake I think entrepreneurs make is they're only focused on the valuation at the time of the deal. And I got to tell you, the thing you should care most about is not what your piece of the pie is worth at the time that you take in money. What you should focus on is how do you maximize the probability of success of your business? And you do that by actually ensuring that you raise money from investors that are highly sophisticated and that add real value to your business, even if it means that you're taking more dilution. Okay, so I want to quickly talk about NEXT Canada, and certainly Jaclyn and Justin, who are students of ours from NEXT Canada, can speak to it as well. But I want to talk about why we created it and what the problem is that we're trying to solve. And I would say that McGill, we have had many students from McGill come through NEXT Canada, and we, including Jaclyn and Justin, but many others. So effectively, at a high level, the problem we're trying to solve at NEXT Canada is what I'd call the prosperity gap. And so if you look at the GDP per capita, and you look at the spread between the US and Canada, we are falling behind at a greater rate, okay? And the reason we are falling behind is not because the median worker is making less money, nor is it because the median worker is less educated, and nor is it because the median worker is working less. It is because we don't have enough what I'll call far right tail value builders, okay? We don't have enough people creating the Facebooks, the Googles, the Amazons in Canada, okay? We have one in Shopify finally, but we have very few others. And so the way in which we increase prosperity in this country for everyone is to create more right tail entrepreneurs who can build things of real significance over time, okay? So that is the challenge. That is the problem that NEXT is trying to solve at a macro level. And at a micro level, what we are trying to do is take young, promising entrepreneurs, dramatically expand their expectations of what's possible, increase their exposure to entrepreneurs, and put them through a very rigorous and difficult competitive program, okay, where it's a 9-month program. Entrepreneurs typically each get $50,000. They have a pretty intense set of instructors. I teach. We have teachers from Harvard Business School, from MIT, and then they've got mentors from mentors being representing some of Canada's most high-profile and successful entrepreneurs. The point of the program is not that we are going to create great businesses in the program, although certainly that happens. But the point of the program, from my perspective, is that what I want is that every one of the graduates of NEXT Canada to, over time, build something bigger, faster, and better than they would have had they not, because they went through the program, all right? And that is what we are focused on. We've just celebrated our 10th anniversary, and we actually just calculated these numbers. The founders, the people who've gone through NEXT Canada have raised $900 million, our founders, okay, in sort of over the past 10 years. And we think that people like Jaclyn and Justin and others are well on their way to building things that really matter. Okay. I want to talk quickly about this environment, okay, in terms of the COVID issues. Okay, so first of all, I'll talk about it from the country's perspective, and then perhaps from your perspective. So I would say, so for me, the single most important thing that happened in my life was when my family, and I had nothing to do with it, my parents thankfully got picked, was when back in the mid 70s, Idi Amin was throwing out Indians from Uganda. That sentiment was also in Kenya. I was born in Mombasa. I spent the first several years of my life in Mombasa, and Pierre Trudeau kind of said, sight unseen, I'll take 25,000 Indians from East Africa. Okay. My parents, who'd never gone to college, put up their hand, and we started a new life in Toronto. Okay. And so for me, that was, if I think about an perhaps even more important point in my life than even going to McGill, was the fact that we were allowed to come into this country. Okay. And this country ended up, both my brother and I ended up going to Harvard, and each of us building some pretty successful businesses. So for me, the reason I created Next Canada had everything to do with some payback. All right. And again, when I talked about freedom to have an impact, this is my freedom to have an impact, right? Meaning I am free to spend a lot of time doing things like this, unencumbered by worrying about where the next dollar is going to come from. Okay. The concern I have with Canada is that I think on the positive, if you look at over the past 10 years, we've built a real entrepreneurial ecosystem. So the barriers to entry for young entrepreneurs to get capital and to start businesses is much lower today than it was 10 years ago. And in fact, I would say that there's just been, frankly, too much proliferation of incubators and accelerators. And so you've got to make sure that if you're entering one of these, that they actually do add real value as opposed to just speak to it. But I do think that the culture has moved and changed. When I think about the fact, when I started teaching at U of T in 2003, 2004, versus today, I feel like the culture has really changed in terms of what people think is possible. And I think that's incredibly important. What I worry about is the risk, sort of capital providers continuing to take the risk of supporting young entrepreneurs. Okay, in an environment like this, people do exactly what they shouldn't do, which is they completely protect all their money. And I think that young entrepreneurs are going to feel the weight of that, in that the availability of venture capital and of startup capital from the Canadian ecosystem, we're already seeing it dry up. And frankly, if there's one part of the entrepreneurial ecosystem that's weak in Canada already, independent of COVID, it's the venture capital angel ecosystem. All right. In terms of, and I'm conscious of the time, so I'll finish up. In terms of all of you, so first of all, I've got 3 kids, one of whom's a freshman and 2 are finishing up grade 11. So I'm acutely aware of the discomfort and you know, the massive issues that this is causing. Okay, for in particular young people, and it's not lost on me the irony of it, that they're taking a lot of the pain, and frankly the stats would show that they're the folks that would least be likely to be impacted by this disease. And so I think that the fact that people of your age have been so productive and been so good around behavior, et cetera, around this is a tribute to this generation. Okay, but what I would also say is, out of discomfort comes massive opportunity. Okay, so one of my key proposals is that as a young person, you should always be seeking positions of discomfort, because that's where you learn. Well, the great thing here is it's been put on you. Okay, so you've actually been placed in a position of discomfort. And so what I would say is, this is going to create a massive dislocation, I think much bigger than what people think, meaning I don't see us just going back to regular behavior. All right, there will be changes in customer behavior that will occur over the long term because of this, because of the context we're going through now, even if you believe that there is a vaccine that cures it all. Okay, and so the question for you is, what are those changes in customer behavior? What are the things that are going to change, and how do you capitalize on it? Okay, independent of what happens with COVID. And you can certainly imagine lots of things that could change in terms of how people work, how they live, how they travel, all those sorts of things. Okay, and so I think the challenge for you is to think hard about this dislocation and the opportunities that it will create. And I can guarantee you it's going to create some very interesting opportunities for aspiring young entrepreneurs. Okay, so with that, why don't I pause? I'll turn it over to Abdul, and I'm happy to, or maybe I'm asking Jaclyn and Justin questions at this point, but Abdul, why don't you give me some direction?
Yeah, absolutely. So now it's going to be a fireside chat. Just want to ask a couple of questions to the three of you, so the audience can hear from entrepreneurs right now and see how things are coming along. So Reza, it's up to you. If you'd rather ask the questions, you can. If not, I can start.
Okay, so I'll turn this over to Jaclyn first, and then to Justin. So just by way of background, both Jaclyn and Justin are McGill grads, as Abdul mentioned, and they both went through the Next Canada program, and are both in the midst of building a business. Jaclyn, this would be Jaclyn's second business. So let me start with a question for each of you. Which is, I think the decision to become an entrepreneur right out of undergrad is not an easy decision. Okay, it's just not again, for all the reasons I've talked about, there are so many barriers for a young person to forego a salary and to actually go and be an entrepreneur. So the question, Jaclyn, perhaps for you first is, what led you to make that decision? And would this current environment, which I guess in theory would make it more difficult, have changed your decision?
Yeah, so I think that for me, entrepreneurship was never a maybe question. It was it's now or it's later. So I think growing up, I always knew I was going to be an entrepreneur. I think the main reasons, three main reasons I think that entrepreneurship is the path for me and should be for a lot of people who have similar values is, the amount of impact, as you mentioned, the impact you can have in your inner circle, but the impact that you can have to the world. I don't think there's any other career path that could provide that kind of impact. Second is the amount of freedom that you get, not only in terms of your work style and whatnot, but the product you're working on, the mission you're working on, the people that you're going to work with. You have so much freedom to create that on your own. And then thirdly, just the level of growth and learning curve that you get to experience as an entrepreneur. I think there is no other career path in which you can have such a high learning growth curve as you would have as an entrepreneur. And so I think those three things were the main driving factors in terms of why I wanted to be an entrepreneur and always wanted to be. And when I think about the current landscape, I would say that none of those have changed. And in fact, I think all of them have more impact that you can have at this current time. You have more freedom to create the team that you want, the business that you want, the product that you want to build, and the learning curve, because of all the challenges you're going to face, is even greater now. So I think if anything, there's more opportunity there, and I would not have changed my decision at all.
Right. Justin, maybe you can give a quick overview of your response, and also maybe talk about to the extent it was everyone has challenges or thinks hard about whether they want to be an entrepreneur or not. What were the skills that you needed to develop to feel comfortable that this was a logical choice for you?
Yeah, so in terms of my decision, it was very much the same as Jaclyn, where entrepreneurship wasn't ever a question, and that and that also kind of led to why I decided to study mechanical engineering. I wanted to pick a skill that would teach me how to break down large, complicated problems with limited information into smaller ones that I could solve. So that was kind of the rationale behind there. And for me, after my undergrad, starting a business was in my opinion, or one of the least risky things I could have, or the least risky time that I could have started a business. If I think about 10 years from now, when I might have a family to support, when I might have financial responsibilities, I'm fortunate that when I graduated, I didn't have those, so I really had nothing to lose. And in terms of the skill sets, like Reza mentioned, this is where Next Canada came to be a huge help for myself, having came from more of a technical background, learning from from some of the best business leaders in Canada about the importance of selling and cash flow and convincing people to quit their jobs and come over and work with you. So all of those were the things that I worked on the most. And then also another big reason what led me to entrepreneurship was my many work experiences. I had done 6 internships at companies ranging from 15 to 10,000 employees, and in every single one I felt blocked and dissatisfied with my ability to execute, with the amount of freedom I had to come up with ideas, to pursue things that I was really passionate about. So that's what kind of pulled the trigger for me in terms of saying there is no other path than being an entrepreneur.
Okay, and look, what I would add to that, what I'd say is that I think that in terms of the skills, I think people have this predisposition to play to their strengths. What I would say is when you're young and the cost isn't as high, is I would actually identify your weaknesses and work on those as fast as you can, okay? And I think actually university is a great place to take a hard look and take some self-reflection as to what are the things that you need to work on and how can you go about working on them to ensure that you're a better person, a better entrepreneur. And so, for me, I remember at university, I hated public speaking. It was something that I just really disliked, but I very much wanted to be an entrepreneur. And I met someone and they said, Reza, it's gonna be very hard for you to convince people of a vision if you're so paranoid of speaking to a group. And so one thing I was good at was taking standardized tests. And so for me, what I did to overcome that was I went down on Sherbrooke Street and interviewed at Kaplan. I don't even know if Kaplan still exists, which was a standardized test service, and forced myself to teach the LSAT and the GMAT to a bunch of people, which was extremely difficult for me. Not because I couldn't do the content, but because of the idea of actually getting up in front of a bunch of people who were older and actually speaking to them. That was not easy. Okay, so my point is, and I have a list of these sorts of things, but my point is identify those things that are difficult for you and work on them now. Okay, in terms of okay, there's we touched on, Jaclyn, we touched on this incubator point, which is, and Justin talked a little bit about Next Canada. Is your for people who are graduating from McGill who are interested in entrepreneurship, what would you say is the most sort of valuable path for them to go down? Is it to actually join one of these incubators or accelerators? Is it to do something different? What would your advice be?
Yeah, so for background, my experiences, I did both Next Canada out of undergrad, and then I did Y Combinator last summer. And so I have kind of some experience and understand the value add it brings on different levels. I think you have to assess what your situation is and what your needs are. I think when you're starting a company, the most important things is, one, your team. Like, do you have a founding team that you feel comfortable building a business with? When I was a student, I had no access to technical founders. That's a huge missing link from myself if I want to build a tech company. And accelerators, incubator programs are great to create a network and meet people who you could start businesses with. 2, do you have capital? If you have $0 in the bank, how are you going to start a company if you need to hire people and you need to fill in gaps of your skills? Again, programs like that can provide that. And then 3, just a network. Do you have a network that can help you sell your first deal? Do you have a network of other founders that you can lean on? And do you have mentors that have expertise in different areas that will help you grow your business? And so I think you have to evaluate where your situation's at. If there are gaps in any of those areas, then I think programs like Next Canada, Y Combinator are great to jumpstart your business.
Jaclyn, you met Shams at Next Canada, your founder, right? Your co-founder.
Yeah.
So I think this point's a critically important point, which is the thing that blows up ventures more than anything else is our founder issues. Okay, issues around vision, trust, conflict, and they happen early, and it happens because founders have not done the work to figure out if they're aligned around goals and mission and values, etc. And so, what was remarkable about Jaclyn's story is that on paper, she partnered with someone who she just met at Next Canada and who, seemed completely different from her, and might not ever put these two people together, and yet they've established a very strong partnership. And I think, are you guys building your second business together as well?
Yeah. And it wasn't themed, it was actually very different.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so Justin, I guess there's a question around mental health. So you know, and how do you stay high performing just generally as an entrepreneur, because I do think it is a more stressful experience, and we can talk about why that is and why it's worth it. But then certainly in this environment, it could make it even more challenging. So maybe you can talk a little bit about how you deal with some of these challenges.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the first and foremost, you do, regardless if you have a team, a founding team, or a team around you, you do need to take care of yourself first, because if you're not available, or you're struggling yourself and can't support others, then the business and everyone around you will end up suffering. So for me, I see it as I struggle with this a lot throughout the beginning, the time and money to invest into my own mental health and my physical health as well. I saw that as time away from building my business, which was the complete wrong mentality to have. I think that by investing the time to either spend 30 or even 15 minutes a day meditating or exercising or doing yoga, will have a much when you compare that to for example, burning out for an entire week. Those 30 minutes added up over time become a lot more essential to you as a founder. So those are some of the things that I do, is really just make sure I spend the time and I listen to my body, I listen to my mind to ensure I'm getting enough sleep, that I'm not overworking myself, and that I'm also a lot less hard on myself during these times, and recognizing that it's normal that we're slightly less productive because of how difficult it is being in full isolation, not having any human contact. And then I think the same message needs to be shared with your team as well, that mental health needs to be made a priority, whether that be going to take a 30-minute walk in the afternoon so that they can actually work productively for the rest of the day. And also bring this conversation to the forefront, I think is important in environments like this, and with your team, where it's not stigmatized, where people feel open to discuss the struggles that they have. Because if you're in the dark about things that they're going through, then the impact that it's going to have on the entire team is going to be a lot greater down the road, compared to you knowing and being able to perhaps support them or offer them resources that they can get help with.
Yeah. Look, I think what Justin's saying is right. I think, I would say that I think part of the challenge of being an entrepreneur is it can be a 24/7 job, and it can certainly feel like, and this is one of the great things about it, is the decisions you make are incredibly consequential, right? Because you are the leader of the business, you are the entrepreneur. And so that is both a great thing, and that is also a very stressful thing, right? Because you're making decisions with massively imperfect and changing information, and without a reservoir of experiences to help you make the right decision. And so this, I think you've got to be the kind of person who wants to be put in that situation and gets real, gets a real, really positive energy out of it. I think that, one of the things that I would also say is that, I don't know, there's a lot of feedback. I don't know if that's one of the things I would also say is that it is that it's critical that you have people in your life, if you're an entrepreneur, that you can actually count on. And I always say that you find your closest friends in times of crisis. And I will tell you, every entrepreneurial venture I've been involved with has gone through a massive period of crisis. It's just what happens. It never goes straight up. And so doing the work ahead of time to make sure that your team is ready and prepared for that is critically important. Okay, so why don't we talked a little bit about ideas, and so my experience has been that ideas have come, the businesses that I have built invariably have been problems that I was solving for myself, or issues that I saw in my day-to-day life that I thought there needed to be a solution for. So, but that may or may not be the case with Jaclyn and Justin. So maybe you guys can talk a little bit about how you come up with an idea, and how you, and perhaps equally importantly, how you actually have conviction to dive into that idea?
Yeah, I can go first. I mean, I think for me, it came out of a personal problem as well as where I think there is an opportunity and where I think the future is moving towards. So we help software engineers who primarily come from non-traditional education get their first jobs in the tech industry. And as somebody who came from a finance background, getting into the tech industry is like hard, and especially 5-6 years ago when you're trying to get into the field and you have no work experience, getting noticed on paper and interviewing through long-winded interview processes is extremely challenging. I've actually never gotten a job that I've interviewed for, and I've interviewed at dozens of companies. The only real job I ever had was from an acquisition of my first startup. And so for me, I really understood firsthand that just because you don't perform well in an interview doesn't mean you don't succeed on the job, and vice versa. And so I really believe that, reimagining what the interview process is like, especially for people new to the field, and especially for an industry like tech, in which your credentials aren't as important as your actual skills. I just thought there was just no possibility that this is going to be how it is in the future. And so I think both from a personal experience standpoint, but also where I think there is an opportunity to change for the better for the future.
Yeah. Justin, did you have any further comments on that?
No, that my current venture, Blaise, was also started out of a personal problem. Just actually when I was at McGill, sitting on empty city buses in the suburbs around Montreal for hours and hours on end, made me realize that this was a huge problem. And what led to the conviction to actually go into it is when we started having conversations with these bus operators and realizing how much data that they have and how little they know how to actually use it. And that's why we have empty buses on the road that don't change decade after decade. Their routes and schedules stay the same, regardless of the fact that our transportation habits have changed. And we're in an environment right now where this problem has been amplified and heightened extremely, because we have no idea where people are needing transportation services or who's going to be using public transit in the future. So yeah, for right now, this is exposed. The current situation has exposed the problem that we were solving, but at 10 times the level that compared to when I started the business. So yeah, it came out of a personal problem, and then the conviction came when we actually started speaking to our clients and discovering all these other problems that they were facing.
Great. Okay. So let's take a more optimistic view in terms of the opportunities today. So Jaclyn, maybe you could speak a little bit about, if you were to think about the time and the context we're in now, what gives startups a comparative advantage in this time, and do you have any ideas of particular areas that you might focus on given the circumstances?
Yeah, so I think if you're starting a company right now in this current pandemic, you should ask yourself a few key questions. The first is, are you building something that is a need, or is it a nice to have? If you're building a nice to have product right now, it's not going to survive. If you're building a product that your customers really, really need, then it'll really show through during a time like this. And are you building a company because you think it's cool to build a company, or are you building it because you think your product really needs to exist? And so I think it's a good time to also evaluate what your motivations are behind starting a business. And so I think, if you have strong conviction, then it's a great time to start a business. Industries that we've seen have been booming. Obviously, work from home, remote tools. A lot of B2B companies that I have entrepreneur friends in are seeing a huge growth curve in terms of work from home or remote tools. Obviously, social, anything that helps you connect with people online is a big opportunity. And also in our space, like online education or reskilling is a big opportunity for people who are looking to gain skills outside of traditional education.
Right. Okay. Justin, any thoughts on that question?
More so on the opportunity side as well. I think it shouldn't be overlooked the fact that how many government programs are funding new solutions like this from the idea stage, and they're surpassing their funding limits. And so there's a lot of money flowing into anything that can provide some solution to a lot of the problems of this new reality that we're facing. So I would say to the government is actively asking for things and telling the world, we have these problems, send us solutions, and we'll fund them and write your first check. So I think that that's something that shouldn't be overlooked in this environment.
Okay, so Jaclyn, if you think about, and I'm happy to answer this question as well, if you think about the biggest challenge that you've had as an entrepreneur, whether it's personal or professional, but related to being an entrepreneur, and the point at which you perhaps thought that this path was not the right path for you. What was the set of circumstances that put you in that position, and how did you get out of that position?
So I've never thought that this path wasn't for me, but in terms of the most challenging situations, I mean, I think the most challenging situations are always people related, whether it's having to fire somebody or, you know, when I was at Kick, we had to do a round of layoffs, and that's challenging. Whether it's like firing a customer, even if they're not using a product properly, I think, or founder issues. I mean, people related issues are always, I think, the most challenging, because there's no right answer, and every person and every problem is unique. And so trying to navigate through those problems, I think, are you know, it helps build you, but also it can help you question, you know, what's the right way to deal with these problems.
Yeah, so it's interesting. So I think the comment that you started with, which is that you've never thought that this path wasn't the right path for you, is a very interesting comment, because it shows a level of conviction that I think is quite rare. What about you, Justin?
One of the biggest ones coming out of school was the overwhelming amount of rejection that you get when starting a business. So that was one of the tougher things to overcome, and hearing constant no's, yet having to, you know, wake up early and fight for this mission that you believe so much in. So I think that that was definitely a huge challenge. Even throughout the NEXT programs, I remember one of the first big no's that we got, and someone told us that they just didn't believe that two, you know, recently graduated undergrads could change, you know, could change the face of mass transportation, or could change the way that mass transportation is run. And we had this told to us multiple times, and so it's taken a while. But like Jaclyn said, I think if you you know, you need to be relentless in your relentless in your pursuit of this mission, and also relentless in your belief of yourself that you as an entrepreneur can achieve it.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's no question that as an entrepreneur, especially one that's just starting up, you are subjected to tremendous negativity, meaning just by definition, the ratio of people who say no to you to people who say yes to you is like anywhere from 10 to 1 to 1,000 to 1. Okay, and I mean people around people you want to come join you, people who you want to invest with you, and people who you want to transact with as customers. Okay, and so what happens, I think, is very quickly you go from this sort of somewhat glamorous idea of having this great vision, and that is very clear to you, and one where you think it's extremely compelling, but the ability to actually translate that into a product or a service that others buy and invest in and work at is a extraordinarily challenging thing. And I think that you know, for me, I remember as a young entrepreneur, I took it very personally, all the no's, right? Because you see it as obvious, and everyone you know is saying no. And what you have to do is realize that you have thought about the problem more than most. And so you spend actually much more time thinking about it. It doesn't mean that you're always right, but it means that you've got to have conviction that you've spent more time on it and that you have more information. And it doesn't mean that you don't pivot if you find out things in the market that are challenging, but what you almost have to realize is that those no's are an inevitable part of being an entrepreneur. And it's almost it actually makes the prize that much more worthwhile, right? Meaning if everyone could get funded or hire people or get customers, the prize would be much smaller because the barrier to entry would be so much lower. And so it is I do think it's a challenging place, but the highs, I would say, are so much greater than any other profession. Your first sale, your first investor, the first time you actually build a product that seems to work. It's an exhilarating feeling, and a big part of that is because so much of it is from you, and that you've you've played such a critical role in developing it. Okay, so Justin, let's talk about, so let's assume that there's some budding entrepreneurs out there that unfortunately have hit a market at a difficult time in terms of getting funding, given the environment we're in. What would your suggestion be to those entrepreneurs that have an idea and that were looking for funding, given the circumstances we're in now?
Well, I would say that not to give up on investors, and having those strong relationships with people that know you, that know your reputation, and can vouch with you. I think those will be even more important than ever, because a lot of investors are just closing their doors completely and not even taking these meetings. So relying on the network that you already have, and there are still people writing checks from what I've seen, and but just the standard or the bar for raising capital has just been raised. But I would say, in terms of the relentless pursuit of opportunity, regardless of resources currently controlled, that comes into play even more now, because if you can't raise money from investors, what are your other options? Can you do it with less money? Can you not take a salary and kind of move into a place that costs less in terms of your own expenses? Or can you go after different sources of funding? Interest rates are lower than they've ever been, so taking on debt is always an option. And then, like I mentioned before, the amount of government funding that's available is something that every entrepreneur, I think, should be taking advantage of where they can. Just to give you an example, in the past 2 months, we've gotten about $500,000 in different sources of government funding, whether that be debts, grants, and wage subsidies, which is more than we had previously raised in the 6 months prior. So I would say not to, if you need the money and you need to get something built, figuring out a way to get it done is part of the challenge that any entrepreneur faces, COVID or not.
Right. Okay. All right. So I'm conscious of the time, and what I'd say is I think what's great about a conversation like this, and I hope people have learned from it, is that in Jaclyn and Justin, you've got folks that are just a few years ahead of where I think many of the people on the phone are, or the webinar are. And I think what you should take from this is that if you have passion around an idea, and if you have conviction, you can make things happen. And what you need to do is to think in a manner that's different than others. You're going to hear no all the time, and so you've just got to make sure that you can handle that. And if the no's are for good reasons, that you actually process that information and make your proposition better. But understand that it is a difficult but highly rewarding road. And what I would say is that the time to actually take these risks are early in your life. I think either Jaclyn or Justin mentioned this, that frankly the trade-offs and opportunity costs are much greater later in your life. And so, and at the end of the day, I think the learning that you get as an entrepreneur, the positions you're putting in yourself in terms of solving problems and thinking about how to actually create value as an entrepreneur are exponentially more valuable to you than any traditional path, in my mind. Okay, and so it doesn't mean that it isn't fraught with risk and that it isn't fraught with failure. But if your goal is to learn as much as possible and to put yourself in a situation where you have tremendous optionality, I'd say this is a great path. And what I'd also say is that I know very few entrepreneurs who haven't gone through a couple of failures prior to hitting it big. And what's great about failure is that you can learn a tremendous amount from that failure. And so I think that putting yourself in positions where you can fail early in your career is a good thing. And it's something which and if you have the good fortune of having a good failure, make sure that you pause, reflect, and think about how you'll be better next time. So with that, I'll turn it over to Abdul.
Thank you, Reza. Thank you as well, Jaclyn, Justin. Wow, I took down a lot of notes as an entrepreneur myself and someone who did not think this path was for them. Your advice, your insights, extremely valuable. So just thank you so much for making the time. As a high-level summary, Reza, you mentioned how entrepreneurship is the relentless pursuit of opportunity without regard to resources currently controlled. and how the latter part of that definition is more important. So for those of you who are considering this path, please do take note. Justin spoke about his multiple internships, the jobs that he had that made him realize the entrepreneurial path was actually for him, and also how important it is to invest in yourself, to take care of yourself, and that funding opportunities are still there, especially with the government. So keep an eye out and pursue those. And finally, for Jaclyn, she mentioned that when you are considering starting a company, assess your current situation, look at your talent, look at your capital, look at your network needs, and see how respective accelerators like NEXT can help you with that. And when it comes to building out businesses, all three of them mentioned, look at personal problems that you are facing, address those, and ensure that, especially in times like COVID, that you're addressing a need and building out a need as opposed to just a nice to have product. So thank you all three again for being here. Thank you to all of our attendees. I just want to sign off by saying that there will be a follow-up email that will include this webinar. You heard a lot about the Next 36 program throughout this presentation. Each year, 36 high potential applicants from across Canada are selected, including many from McGill, and they're provided with these skill sets and resources to become high impact entrepreneurs like Justin and Jaclyn over the course of an 8-month intensive program. You have access to up to $50,000 in seed capital, world-class guest speakers, a network of Canada's top business leaders and entrepreneurs like Reza, startup parks, and more. Please visit their website at www.next36.ca for full details on eligibility and requirements. You can also reach out to Justin and Jaclyn, who are ambassadors, and be sure to look out for Blaise Transit and Hatchways as they continue to blaze their respective pathways and put Canada's startup ecosystem on the global map. So thank you all once again. Please stay safe. We're going to wrap up with one final question for our speakers. I'd ask Justin to start off, followed by Jaclyn and Reza to conclude. So what is one piece of parting advice you would like to share with the audience that has served you well over the course of your entrepreneurial journey?
The best piece of starting advice would be to pick something that you're passionate about. Don't pick something that don't pick a problem that you want to solve or an idea that you think is going to be a quick cash grab, because no path as starting a business is going to be easy. There's going to be extreme crisis, and if you're not truly passionate, if you don't truly believe in what you're trying to do, then you'll struggle a heck of a lot more. So that's what I would say.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you're starting a business right now, specifically, I think you should try to look at the situation in a positive light. In what entrepreneurs and startups, what their strengths are is being adaptable and being nimble. And this is a specific, time where those two skills will help you win. And so this will be a great opportunity for you to jumpstart your startup.
Thank you.
So I'm going to focus more from a personal perspective, sort of thinking about yourselves. What I would say is that there are so many people that are going to tell you it's the wrong time or a bad idea or that it's not something you should do. And so what I would say is that the advice that I would give you most is to trust your instincts. Okay, what I've found with the best entrepreneurs is that in the face of a lot of uncertainty and a lot of negativity and a lot of misinformation or changing information or imperfect information, ability to sort of stay true to your convictions and your instincts is remarkably powerful.
Perfect. Thank you all again so much. And to the rest of the attendees, thank you. Have a good day. Bye-bye.